Nick, welcome. You're the CTO of the New York Times. Thank you very much for joining us. You've been with the New York Times for about 3 years now?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, a little over.
And before that, you were a CTO of Condé Nast?
I was a CTO of Condé Nast for a few years before that, and a couple of startups along the way, a bunch of time at MTV Networks, all media and technology, digital media.
Okay. All right, so we're going to dive into all sorts of technical topics, but so things seem to be going really well, right? The New York Times, especially in a context where digital news and digital media tends to be a difficult industry, right, with the dominance of Facebook and all those things. But I was just looking at the stats that you guys published at the end of the year. 4 million total paid subscribers. Is that
yeah, a little higher than that. We'll end the year a bit higher. I think that was the third quarter number.
Okay. And there was this phenomenon known as a Trump bump, right?
Well, I mean, the Trump bump was real. I think we really passed the Trump bump a while ago, probably even mid to late 2017. So what we saw in 2018 was something different. Was actually, I think, real momentum and the beginning of well, not the beginning, but the continuation of our sort of acceleration away from the pack for a number of reasons. So I think we feel like that's a post-Trump bump phenomenon. Now, granted, the news environment is still absolutely bonkers, and the political situation is like something to make everybody like lose their minds about. So it's still a great news environment, but it's not the crazy peak that we saw in like the first quarter, second quarter of 2017.
Yeah, there was another amusing stat, speaking of which, 34 Twitter mentions from one loyal White House reader. So that was last
yeah,
week.
I thought it would be higher than that. I was a little disappointed, honestly. It's kind of lame.
But other than that, 55,000 stories published, which is 50 million words, and 1,550 journalists on staff. Also, there was another interesting thing I saw on Twitter. So I actually didn't realize, but the New York Times has a developer Twitter account, which is NYTDevs, at NYTDevs. And it said that you guys are hiring 175 engineers in the next year.
Yeah, I said that on Twitter too, and I got yelled at. I wasn't supposed to say that, but I guess we can say it now because you just did. So whatever. But yeah, we're hiring a bunch, and I guess I mean still in the scale of doing like product development, that's not a big number. Or that gets us to a total of maybe 375 to 400 engineers working on the product. That's not a giant number in scale product development. So. But it starts to look real, like we actually are a real product development company, and that's good. So I'm pretty happy about it.
Okay, very good. And that was across data engineering, machine learning, join the club, iOS and Android. Okay, very good. All right, so to start with, I wanted to spend actually a good amount of time on this super interesting digitization project that you guys have been working on. And you made a really cool video that we wanted to show.
First New York City subway in 1904. And there you have it. The Morgue is what makes the Times the Times. There's 600 cabinets, a few thousand drawers, 6 to 8 million photographs dating from the late 1800s on till the 1990s. This is the Flying Hunters. This ran in 1930. George Washington Bridge, France's biggest naval ship, American soldier, greeting his mom, Christmas at Penn Station. I mean, there's pretty much anything and everything. The history of the world through the eyes of the New York Times.
I didn't think too much about it at first. Like, yeah, sure, we have photo archives. And then I learned more about it, and there were like millions and millions of photos down there that, except for like one person, nobody really knows what's hiding down there.
For every picture that we were able to publish, many never saw the light of day.
The more that I've worked down in the morgue, the more the real value and the real importance of having access to it dawned on me.
The exciting thing about this project is the New York Times has over 100 years of photos locked in a basement, and this project will allow people to see photos that have never been seen before and make them accessible to the newsroom at the New York Times.
When I first heard that there was a possibility of us digitizing this, I was really excited.
So Google and the New York Times have had a partnership for many years, and we think it's actually an ideal partnership to be able to leverage the power of Google Cloud's technology. What Google is bringing to the table is a lot of the infrastructure that the New York Times needs, as well as providing these sort of platform-level services on the Vision APIs.
The first part of the digitization process is obviously the physical scan of the photos, getting them out of folders, getting them out of all these boxes, and physically scanning them.
So here's the front of the picture, but the back of the picture is just as interesting.
The stamps, handwritten notes, etc., that tells us something about the photo, who took it, etc. That is the data we need to extract.
These markers all over the back are the clues for where the picture was used. So here it was published in the newspaper at least twice. Here we can see the captions that were taped on the back indicating publication. And along this top edge, there's a number. That is the indicator of where this photograph lives inside the morgue.
We'll upload them into tools which will allow the photo editors to search the archive and bring up the images they need.
So once we're done with this, it'll enable the newsroom to immediately access our entire archive from their desktop.
Once the pictures are digitized, I mean, everything old is new again.
We get the sense that covering current events is talking about what just happened, but having this resource available to reporters and editors gives them the ability to draw in all of the context of what preceded, the wider world that led to this contemporary event.
There is nothing else, no other way of reporting what goes on in the universe that can do that the way a still photograph can.
The idea of telling stories in pictures is how society works now.
For Google, our job is to make the world's information universally accessible and useful. And in this project, we're helping the New York Times with their data to be able to do that.
So first of all, that place downstairs is called the Morgue.
Yeah, that's where we go. Yeah.
So tell us about the whole thing then. When did you guys start, and what has the process been? Because you have 6 million of those pictures.
Yeah, we think. Like, we don't really know, honestly. There are piles on top of the filing cabinet, so it's unclear. But we think it's about 6 million. I mean, the digitization process started in last spring, I believe. But we've been talking about this with Google for at least a couple of years, and honestly, it's a project we've been trying to do for like 15 years, maybe 20. And what I like best about this project actually is to me it sort of captures a moment where this kind of elusive project, which is kind of a nice to have project, like this was not a critical like business need for us, but it was something that was eating at us all because these photos are like moldering in the basement, and we know what a great asset it is, and how just fascinating they are. It's a moment where suddenly that becomes economical to do, and not only does it become economical, but then it starts to feed this cycle where we like all of this data becomes accessible, because of the cloud and the access to compute power and storage and so on, and then becomes potentially tractable to machine learning. I mean, at the moment, we're just doing a little bit, but as that allows us to develop techniques to work with like very large bodies of imagery, that actually will enable us to do things differently and make the report more visual in the long term, as well as to mine effectively what will become a much larger and larger archive as we roll into the future, and it becomes this kind of self-supporting cycle. So to me, it's one of these things that like we couldn't do it. Suddenly we can do it, and that like indicates something, that we passed some milestone, which I think.
And for now, it's for internal use, right? It's for the newsroom to access the archives, or is that going to be exposed to the public eventually?
We're thinking about it. We might expose it to the public. I think I personally would love to see that happen. There's rights issues, like there always are. Like some of those notes scrawled on the back of those photographs, denote who owns the image, who took the image, and there's some complexity. But for now, it's for internal use, but it's being used actively to tell stories to the public. So we're routinely now running these backward-looking series that we're reminding the archive to tell specific stories. The best example is the Overlooked series, where we're going back and running obituaries of famous women who didn't get obituaries printed in the paper because we were stupid. So that's a great moment. It's a great way to retell our past stories in a way that reflects the current moment. So it's fun.
And you mentioned machine learning, a little bit of machine learning. So what do you use it for now?
Well, for the digitization processes, I think it was Alan who mentioned it. We're doing some text recognition on those notes on the back, and as we're learning more about the quote structure of those notes, which is very evolves a lot over the years and is very haphazard, that helps us extract more of that data off the back of the pictures, as well as doing facial recognition and place recognition on the content of the photos to pick up unexpected things. I wish I had a good anecdote. I was trying to think of one coming over. We have found unexpected people in the backgrounds who later became famous and notable and recognizable. So that kind of thing, to extract either information we didn't know was in those pictures, or that's encoded in this kind of loosely on the back of the photos. That's what we're doing today. But it's particularly that ability to work with and correlate the imagery across time that I think is pretty cool going forward.
And the scanning process itself, was it in the video? There was somebody actually taking pictures with the hood open. That's presumably not how it works, right? Is it?
Not what?
Is it presumably not how it works, right? Are there people that...
There are people putting photographs on scanning beds, yeah.
Okay.
We don't know how, yeah. I mean, not all the time, I don't think. I actually,
60 pictures?
What's that? Yeah, it's going to take a while. But, I mean, they're delicate. There's not could someone devise a machine to handle delicate artifacts like that and scan them effectively? Perhaps, but it's not a copy machine or something. So that's what we're doing right now.
Yeah. And maybe talk a little bit to the technical aspects of it in terms of, I guess, Google tools that were used.
I mean, it is a pretty simple project technically. I mean, mostly we are running through the image recognition and text recognition to try to extract what we can. But otherwise, it's we're using Google storage and GCS and
Spanner as well with it.
Yeah, I think we're using Spanner for the database. So, but it's a simple database, simple asset management system. I think I don't know if we want to get into it or not, but this is the culmination of a long process that we've done to migrate almost everything we're doing to Google Cloud. Still a certain amount of stuff running in Amazon. So, in general, we're doing all of our data processing on Google's data infrastructure now. And most of our compute is in Kubernetes and GKE, so
yep,
we're pretty deep into that.
Great. So that's actually a perfect segue into talking about the infrastructure at the New York Times that you oversee. So when did that migration start? What was the situation before? You guys had your own data center, or how did that work?
Yeah, we were behind. I'd say significantly behind the curve. We had 4 of our own leased data centers. A lot of stuff in AWS. Some of it in a VPC. Some of it just laying around in AWS Classic. And not really a strategy around why we were doing what. And when I came in, we started to look at it, and sort of impulsive. I had an eye. This was late 2015, early 2016. And I've been watching Google Cloud for a while. And when are they going to get serious? Blah blah blah. And the obvious thing was to plow ahead to AWS. And then at the last second, we were like, well, let's take a look, see how they're doing. And we looked at the data infrastructure first. Took a look at BigQuery, and we're like, holy shit. So we were like, okay, data, we're going to go all Google, which was PubSub, Dataflow, Dataproc into BigQuery. And then from there, we continued to get excited and ended up going pretty deep.
Interesting. So that BigQuery was the driver of the choice.
That was, and I would say still is the most differentiated element of GCP, and I think it's still unequaled, at least in cloud accessible mass, large scale available databases, that kind of thing.
And as of now, you've moved most of your stuff to GCP?
Yeah, most of the consumer-facing product stuff is in GCP, and I'd say all of our all the data that we generate coming out of the products is being processed through BigQuery.
Okay. What else do you have in your infrastructure? What other companies do you use? I read somewhere that you guys are a big Fastly partner.
I like Fastly. Like in a media business, caching is like the simplest.
Fastly is CDN.
Yeah, CDN. So it's like the no-brainer thing that you do. And actually, when I got to the times, we didn't do it. I was like,
and maybe explain what a CDN is, since we have
content delivery network. It's for caching content, so that protect our data center against like large crowds. So we're pretty scaled. We see 150 million uniques in a month, and our subscribers are pretty engaged, and they'll turn 250 articles a month. But it's really the spikes, it's newsworthy events, the occasional DDoS attack, or elections that will bring us to our knees without proper CDN protection. So we actually put Fastly in place in the run-up to the election, which was amusing because I spent the first part of the election night worrying about the infrastructure, and the second part worrying about the future of humanity. So, but the infrastructure was fine, so I did my job.
Yeah. And what else? Are you guys a big open source shop, or what do you?
I mean, everybody is to some degree. What is open source these days anyway? It's sort of confusing and weird, but a lot of the things we dabble in are pretty familiar. On the front end, it's React and a little bit of Node and a GraphQL sort of around as our main sort of API to the content. We did a big Kafka implementation as well, which runs our main publishing pipeline, so all content flows through Kafka on its way to the front end. There's a New York startup that we're working with called Action IQ that is like a marketing campaign management platform that's sitting on top of our BigQuery data lake that we're pretty happy with, because that's been a real sore spot for us historically. It's like running our increasingly large pre-scaled marketing operations. So that's
and we're investors, but I promise this was not planned. Thank you. And a little bit to the the Kafka conversation and GCP, this evolution where big cloud providers are increasingly taking successful open source company and open source projects. So in the case of Kafka, I guess Confluent, but I guess just last week there was this announcement, AWS and Mongo, where basically AWS took the Mongo open source code and did its own implementation of it. But any thoughts on this, on what that means from a technologist perspective? Is that a
I mean, with the caveat that I don't really consider myself to be an expert, but I'm going to say some bold things that I can't necessarily back up. I mean, I think the page is being turned in a big way on the open source era, and I think the business models around open source were always a little bit of a house of cards and a little fragile, and I think there was an interesting thing I read today. I wish I could remember who wrote it. It was the Ben Thompson.
Yeah,
guy. Yeah, he was kind of saying it all rested on sort of the general friction and terribleness of getting anything done that we all suffered from, partly from running our own data centers and stupid things like that. And I don't know if I completely agree with him, but generally, I think it's true. And the other factor, the bigger factor, is that the level of investment going into infrastructure from the big cloud providers dwarfs even the investment of effort that a robust open source community can match. So I just think Amazon, Microsoft, and Google are absolutely moving far, far away from the pack in terms of their ability to create infrastructure software. So I feel like from now on, it's their game to write our databases and our message queues and our all of our core bits of infrastructure and primitives, and open source just isn't it's gonna be a corner case in the future. That's but there's life on the front end, because that's just sort of weird, and the big cloud providers don't know what to do there. But on the back end, I think those days are probably pretty much gone.
Mm-hmm. And this
it's part of the big cloud providers' playbook now to open source parts of what they do to drive adoption.
Yep. There is a trend that you wrote about that is probably accelerating this as well, which is serverless. Mm-hmm. And you had you seem to be very enthusiastic about this. Do you want to talk about it? Maybe define it for people, and then talk about why you're excited about it.
Yeah. So my definition of serverless is any delivery of an application where there's no operating system in sight. You don't have to think about an operating system. You don't have to patch anything. You're basically deploying code in some packaging scheme to something that runs it, and you don't have to think about scaling it or anything like, you don't think about instances or cores or the underlying resources. That's all managed for you. So that's a pretty broad definition that includes something like Fastly, actually, like a CDN. It also includes something like BigQuery, that's just a managed service, and it also includes something like App Engine. It does include cloud functions, but I'm personally not that interested in cloud functions. So,
and that's as opposed to, I think you had a nice sentence in your blog post that was as opposed to basically replicating what you have in your data center in a different data center, which is Amazon's or Google's, right?
Yeah, I would say like Cloud 1.0 was replicating our like data centers and forklifting them to somewhere else. But serverless to me is like immensely more powerful. And again, I don't really necessarily know what I'm talking about, but to me, it should be ultimately a far more efficient, like a well-managed serverless application platform should be much more efficient use of the underlying resources than anything I'm going to be able to produce and manage. Let alone what happens in Amazon's core instance-based business model, which is basically predicated on selling me a lot of things that I barely use and forcing me to pay for them. So that's sort of uncool. But like a well-managed serverless platform should actually have very high efficient utilization of the underlying resources, as well as efficiency in the way that I pay for them and acquire them. So provided there's sufficient competition between the cloud platforms, which I think there is, it ought to drive a tenfold increase in efficiency in compute, I would think, and corresponding cost savings, but really more importantly than that, just the ability to focus on actually writing code that is important in my business and not doing a bunch of other crap.
Yeah, and that has a very big implication on the structure of a typical IT organization, right? Because it means there's a bunch of people whose job is to set up those servers, manage those servers, make sure they scale. That will not need to do that anymore. Those people will not be needed anymore.
Yeah, so even in the stage we're at from our fairly basic cloud migration, we're doing some serverless stuff, but it's still a journey. I've thought of it as like the de-opsification of my team, essentially, where at the same time, driven by both like opportunity and kind of necessity, like we broke down kind of a powerful ops organization and replaced it with, a little bit of a kind of delivery engineering organization, plus a little more like responsibility distributed to our development teams, and then a lot of responsibility distributed to our cloud providers. And that felt healthy, frankly, and like a good evolution.
Great. So maybe just one last question or theme from me, and then we'll lead it up to people. You wrote something very interesting about building an engineering organization and a culture like you do code. Mm-hmm. Do you want to elaborate on that? I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah, I think if you read the post, the way that this really happened was sort of accidental. Like I showed up and started to work with the team, and we were kind of like, inevitably in software teams, like culture is important. We're like, how do you get people thinking in the right way, collaborating in the right way? How do we, create a culture that people want to join? And we just started to think like, well, okay, that's a hard conversation. That's weird, and culture is hard to like grab a hold of. But what's one thing we can grab a hold of that we think would help? And we started, I think it was career ladders. So we're like, okay, let's like take that. Let's write down what we think it looks like now, and then let's go through a process to like iterate on a little bit, and let's like test it, and then let's try to get it out there, and like let's keep looking at it. And we repeated this process like over and over, looking at every kind of thing that we thought we could materialize that would have some impact on, on the way it felt to be a software developer at the New York Times. And it was only after we've been doing this for a while that we were kind of like, oh, surprise, surprise, we're all software engineers. This looks a lot like a software development process, But I think that there was something interesting there, and I think the key to me, well, there's a bunch of keys that all are kind of like what are the things that help a group write software, but a big part of it was modularizing what culture meant. So like being willing to start with one thing and materializing it and like putting it down as text so that we could work on it. And then we thought about using like Git, to like do it, but in the end we used Google Docs for the most part. But there was a collaborative like editing and iteration process. And then what does testing look like? Testing looked like rolling it out to like incrementally larger like chunks of the organization for additional comment and refinement. And then a process to keep sort of like things going on indefinitely. And I think it was really effective and it's still not a linear process. You can't say our culture is X and I'm going to make it Y and I'm going to do these 10 things to get there. But that's not the way software works either. So like this kind of stepwise progress towards a goal guided by some values and some basic, and a lot of feedback, I think was really quite effective for us. And I think we made a lot of change happen in a fairly condensed period of time. It felt good.
Very interesting. All right, let's open up over there.
Fascinating presentation. You were speaking before about just the incredible skill of technology investment that cloud providers are investing in, including this or inspiring. At the same juncture, do you worry about whether you're making the Oracle decision all over again? In other words, the cloud vendor locked in?
It's a very rational thing to worry about, and the moment I have a very irrational attitude about it, which is to learn to love the lock-in. And I just feel like if you're not at the cutting edge of at least one of these clouds, because they're moving so quickly and there's so much innovation happening, then you're losing. You're not taking advantage of the situation. If you're trying to be completely portable, you're leaving a lot on the table. Now, that's different for different businesses. Like some people have, for all sorts of reasons, whether it's scale or regulation or just risk, the way they manage risk, maybe can't do that. I think we could. So we bet on diving in deep and accepting the lock-in and trying to get the most out of each moment and be on the cutting edge.
Would you say that you are currently exploring other digital channels of distributing the news, or are you just trying to optimize the ones that you currently have?
Do you mean platforms like Apple News and Snapchat and stuff like that? We're always exploring. The dance with the platforms is always complex and ongoing and very dynamic. We do strongly believe that the environment that we can control is our own environment, and the best experience that we can give our readers with our journalism is on our own products, so in our app and on our website. We know that we need to be engaged with the social platforms to reach people. I really view it as part of our marketing funnel more than anything else. We don't think it's a good delivery vehicle for our product, and we also don't think we can build a business in any of the platforms really. So to me, it's part of the marketing strategy. It's part of a way to get reach, introduce people to the product. But we really want to bring people back to our own things because that's the only way we can, actually, the product can be differentiated and really shine.
One last question.
You mentioned that your subscriber numbers are growing in a very healthy manner. I was wondering if there's any plans to roll out prices go or prices you read or micropayment style capabilities.
We think about it a lot, and we've looked at a lot of the entrants into the market who've tried to aggregate and do kind of that microtransaction pricing. So I never say never. My personal belief is that the complexity and the friction it creates in a reader's mind is not helpful. They have to make a lot of decisions, oh, should I buy this article? And what about that one? Oh my God. And that the beauty of the sub model is you pay once and you get everything. And that's really powerful. That we've seen the power of. So I'd say we're not super motivated to explore that On the other hand, like, is there a lower priced product that would be valuable to like many more people that isn't too cannibalistic what we do? Like, that's an interest. I'd be more interested in that question than like a microtransaction model. But hey, you never know. Like, things could change.
All right, Nick, thank you so much. This was terrific. Everyone, if you could please thank Nick and also very much all our speakers and host Moody's tonight. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you at the next one.
Thank you.